Emir's Education in the Proper Use of Magical Powers by Jane Roberts, illustrated by Lynn Cherry, read by Martin John. The final chapter, Chapter 8. The world gets bigger and better, Emir triumphs, and inspiration says goodbye. The alligators came up from the swamp again and lounged on the banks to hear Emir's story. All the fish came as close to the shore as they could and propped their heads up in the water to listen. The trees opened their green leafy ears. The insects stopped buzzing so as not to disturb the multitude, and not one dog barked. Emir felt very pleased with himself, and very important. He explained all about the seasons, and death, and the parade of life. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, and Emir was certain that he'd stated his case so well that there would be no problems at all. The trees clapped their leaves together. The animals brayed or barked or meowed or roared. The plants and flowers rustled. The people shouted, "Hooray for Emir!" Then, gradually, everything quieted. Said the king, "You've done a great job, Emir, but I can foresee a few difficulties." "I can foresee 1,000 difficulties," hooted an owl who looked very disgruntled. "Birds don't take up nearly as much space on the ground as animals do. Birds can fly, after all, and it would take millions of birds to fill up the sky. So birds should be able to live forever." All of the birds flapped their wings in agreement. A cat, sitting by Emir, spoke up angrily. "Ridiculous! Animals can move to less crowded areas. So only things that can't move, like trees or flowers, should die and have seasons." With this, the trees thrashed their branches and made a terrible roaring noise. The animals started quarreling among themselves. Emir's father shouted for order. "I am the king," he said. "I have the only possible solution. Every creature and thing will have its special season, and then die as Emir suggested. Except for people, of course. People will live forever to rule the rest of the creatures and see that everything runs smoothly." "How wise the king is!" shouted all the people. Emir's mother, the queen, smiled and said, "How wise you are, Chamil." The king looked at Emir. "What do you think about my solution, my son? Don't you think it wise?" Emir hung his head. "Well, Emir?" said his father. "Well, Emir?" said his mother. All the other creatures and plants and insects were booing so loudly that Emir hated to add his boos to theirs. So he said, in a very low voice, "No, father." "No what?" the king demanded. "Speak up, Emir." "You better speak up, Emir," rustled the trees. "People have to have seasons too," Emir said miserably, because though he knew he was right, he didn't like to disagree with his father. "People have to die too, and come alive in another time, someplace else. Everybody has to agree, or the plan won't work." "You're just a little boy," the king said. "What do you know?" "That's not fair," Emir shouted, "after all I've done." "I'm afraid that Emir let all the praise go to his head," his mother said. Emir tried not to pout because he knew that while his parents were often right, sometimes they made mistakes. So he said stubbornly, "People have to die too, or there won't be any Joan of Arc or Napoleon or Michelangelo, or millions of other people either." "It's all or nothing," the hippopotamus shouted. "What's good for the goose is good for the gander," called a goose. A palm tree shook its fronds fussily and said, "I have a suggestion. If we're going to have seasons, well, I'd rather we had summer all the time. This weather has never quite suited my fancy. It's all right, you understand, but it's never really warm enough for me." "Well, I certainly wouldn't want summer," cried a polar bear. "It's too warm for me all the time as it is." He growled, reared up on his legs, then stamped his front paws on the ground so hard that little cracks showed in the dirt. "I vote for winter with lots of snow." Emir frowned. The animals soon would be coming to blows if he didn't think of something. "This won't do at all," he cried. "See what you started, Emir," his father said. Emir looked around frantically for inspiration, but she was nowhere to be seen. An alligator yelled out, "In any case, I want a rainy season. Some idiot stopped the rain a while back, and that was nearly a tragedy." "I don't care, as long as there's some rain," said a rose, speaking up and waving its petals gracefully. "But if we're going to die and then grow up again, I think we should have some reward. I'd like to die at least once a year and grow up in another corner of the garden, then in still another corner, and then—" "Yes, and then?" asked the flowers. "And then die and come to life in an entirely different garden, in some other part of the kingdom. That way, flowers would get to see more of the world." "I'm certainly not going to die every year," said Emir's mother. "That would be confusing. I want to live 100 years each time," said a little girl. "Not me. I want to live 10 years at a time," someone else shouted. Emir's father spoke more loudly than anybody else when he said, "I'm the king, and I like the life I have, and that's that." When Emir heard his father's words, he was so disappointed that he crept away by himself. If he didn't do something, he thought, there would be no parade of life or anything else. He'd never felt so sad and hopeless. He looked up at the sky. The sun was shining. Little white clouds skimmed through the blue heavens like boats. Didn't the sky care that he felt so badly? Emir almost spoke the words, "I demand some help." But he caught himself just in time. If there's one thing he'd learned, it was that demanding only got you trouble. "Please help me, Inspiration," he said. "Where are you? I really need you, and I don't see you anywhere." "Oh, Emir, I'm right here. You don't have to see me," said a voice that was certainly Inspiration's. "Well, I could talk to you better if I saw you. I'm sure of that," Emir cried. "Oh, all right," she answered, and suddenly there she was, this time wearing a dress yellow and bright as sunshine or fresh corn. Her hair was yellow too. "I look so brilliant because you have the answers already, though you don't know it yet," she said. I do? Emir asked, brightening himself. But then his face darkened once again. Do you hear all the arguing? He asked. It's awful. The creatures and people and plants all want different things. But worse, they can't even agree with each other. Some people want to live 100 years. Some want to live 10 years and then be born again someplace else. So what's the problem? Inspiration asked. What's the problem? Emir almost shouted. Some creatures want summer all the time. Some want winter. Some want a combination of seasons. But more than that, my father wants to be king all the while, and he doesn't want to die at all. By now, Emir was near tears. He heard a lion and a bumblebee arguing, and the bumblebee buzzed nearly as loud as the lion roared. Emir, Inspiration said, rather gently for her, I'll take pity on you and tell you the truth, though I thought you would have figured it out by now. There's room in nature for millions of different tastes and preferences. It will all work out if you will just stop worrying and listen to me. Emir studied his red slippers. After all, he thought, Inspiration had been trustworthy, even if she was impatient at times. All right, I'm listening, he said. First of all, your father will get tired of being the king all the time. Once he knows death is possible, he'll choose to die so that he can start out again and be something else. That's hard to imagine, Emir said doubtfully. But it's true, Inspiration replied. Now that death gives him an option, he'll know that he can die and his curiosity will get the best of him. And nature will see to it that every plant and creature has the particular conditions it wants for life. You mean it will be cold for the polar bear and hot for the palm tree? Emir asked. That sounds impossible. Inspiration grinned and said, I have a surprise for you. Leave your body where it is and come with me. You'll see that I know what I'm talking about. Once you accept death and give life a chance, everything else is taken care of. What's the surprise? Emir asked suspiciously. I don't know if I like surprises or not. Come on, step out of your regular body and I'll show you, Inspiration coaxed. You can't see the surprise otherwise. Emir thought that Inspiration sounded very mysterious, so he held his breath for a minute, then closed his eyes, and then walked right out of his body as he had before. Hurry, Inspiration urged, but Emir said, Just a minute. He bent over and said to his regular body, Don't you worry, I'll be right back. In the next moment, Inspiration took Emir's hand, and the two of them were high in the air. Beneath them was Emir's land, quite small, really. Emir could see the golden manes of several lions who were arguing with two zebras, and he saw the people who were still arguing among themselves. Then suddenly the land began to expand. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. Emir gasped. I insist on winter all the time, shouted a polar bear, its voice carrying right up through the air. The polar bears were all standing together in the coolest corner of the kingdom as they always did, and before the polar bear finished speaking, that part of the kingdom got bigger and bigger and went further away at the same time, and it became much colder. Emir could see that the snow was falling over the polar bears, who were dancing up and down and shouting, "Thank you, thank you." "That's Northland," Inspiration said, and even as she spoke, Northland grew still larger, and all the other creatures and plants that wanted cold weather were all there, too. And almost, though not exactly in the twinkling of an eye, the kingdom continued to expand, and one part became the Southland, where Emir saw the palm trees, followed by all the other creatures or people or plants who loved warm weather. All this happened so quickly that, of course, Emir couldn't really keep track. When it was all over, though, every creature and everything else had its own special climate and seasons, and lots of space besides. "When will the dying start?" Emir asked when he got his breath. "Any time at all," Inspiration answered. "Plant or creature bodies won't last long, because they won't have to. And, of course, they'll get old." "What's old?" Emir asked. "Another new invention?" "Well, old is like a signal to tell you it's time to start another new life," Inspiration answered. "You'll get wise when you're old, which is like a reward. You remember everything that happened and learn from it. But don't interrupt me when I'm doing so well," Inspiration said impatiently. "It means you aren't wise yet. Some people will get wisdom when they're young, of course, but everyone will get wisdom sometime." Emir hardly heard what Inspiration was saying because he was trying to keep track of what was happening to his father's kingdom. A small cloud got in the way, and he yelled out, asking it to move so he could see better. When it did, Emir blinked and rubbed his eyes in astonishment. The land had stretched out so far in every direction that he couldn't see the furthest portions of it at all. "Mother will never make it by horseback from one end of the kingdom to the other now," he said. "Look, east and west are much further apart, too," Inspiration said. But Emir was staring at something that really fascinated him. All the swamps and lakes and ponds had grown and grown too, so that now there were huge oceans and rivers. "Look at those giant swamps," he yelled. "The alligators should really be happy." "Will you forget the alligators?" Inspiration asked. "But I can see them smiling from way up here." Emir was so excited and happy about it all that he grabbed Inspiration's other hand and danced around in a circle right in the sky. Inspiration laughed but said, "It's time to go back now. Your parents will be looking for you." In the next instant, Emir saw his parents far below, and he and Inspiration came flying through the air, invisible, of course, and then Emir stood right in front of his regular body, which was resting very comfortably. "Well, here goes," shouted Emir. He felt so good that he put his outstretched hands together and dived into his body, which sat up immediately. "You won't believe what's been happening," his father said. "You slept through the whole thing." I haven't really been asleep, and I can explain everything, Emir said. Just then his mother, the queen, arrived, looking worried. Why, at least half the creatures have just disappeared, she cried. It's just that the kingdom has grown so big that you can't see where the creatures are, Emir explained, all excited. See how much more room we have? Still, I'll miss the polar bears, Emir's mother said. You can go and visit them, my dear, the king replied. In the meantime, the creatures and people who were left came running up to Emir. We have ever so much more space now, they said, laughing. It's ever so much nicer than it was before. I guess it will all work out, the queen said. Still, with people living and dying all the time, this is really going to change my census-taking. It would be nicer if everyone had to die on Wednesday, say, and be born on Saturday. I know people and creatures and plants, too, will change their minds all the time. Neither the king nor the queen could see Inspiration, who suddenly appeared beside Emir. She whispered in his ear, and he repeated her words to his parents. It's quite all right, he said. People and things can change their minds any time they want, except that, overall, they have to die sometime. And their bodies will just wear out after a while, so they'll want to move out of them anyhow. How wise, the queen said. Emir grinned and mentally thanked Inspiration for telling him what to say. Then his mother said, It's been a big day for you, Emir. It's time that you went back to the palace for a good night's sleep. Emir had the funniest feeling that something else was going to happen. So he said, Please, let me stay out just a bit longer. His father smiled. All right, I guess we can bend the rules a little since you've done such an excellent job of solving our problems, he said. So the king and queen went back to the palace, and Emir sat alone out in the garden. Once again Emir felt as if the whole world was waiting for something. But for what? Inspiration, what's happening? He whispered. Shh! Wait and see, she said. So Emir held his breath and waited. Even the chatty flowers were asleep after the exciting day, but they slept with one eye open, as if waiting for what might happen next. Now there was plenty of room for each leaf on each flower's stem, and the flowers and plants looked much healthier and happier than before. The birds snuggled in their nests on the tree branches, where before so many birds had to nest on the trees that the branches got heavy and tired. Watching everything, Emir almost dozed. The air was so pleasant and soft. Then the sky shimmered and Emir's eyes snapped wide open. He knew instantly that a magic moment was approaching, because the sky was speaking to him. Emir, there's a message for you, the sky said, and suddenly the heavens opened up, or seemed to, and Emir saw the land of the gods once again. There was Skymaker on his high stool painting new skies, and there was Millionfeeler, the insect god, in the process of making new insect worlds. And there was Wisest Frog with his book of the universe, in which all things were written. Hello, hello, Emir shouted. I never thought I'd see any of you again. Thanks to you, all the insects now have their own times and places, Chameleon Feeler said. I'm very busy helping them figure everything out. Now the bumblebees will always be near flowers, and ants will have plenty of room for their ant hills. It's marvelous. Again, I'm making newer and better summer and winter skies, and rainy ones and sunny ones and in-between ones, Skymaker said, smiling. His sky-blue face blended with the heavens, and his black beard hung out over a white cloud. And because you've been so courageous and taught the people to join the parade of life, there's a special message for you. This time, listen, Inspiration cautioned. So Emir did. At first he didn't hear anything, and he got worried. Then the sky above him closed up again, and the land of the gods disappeared, and Emir kept listening. He heard the flowers murmuring in their sleep, and the whirling of insect wings, and the rustling of the grasses. He even heard tiny moles and snakes moving under the ground. Emir wiggled. Was he supposed to hear more than that? So he listened some more, and Emir heard the deep, quiet breathing of the sky and of the earth. It was such a lovely, strange sound that Emir held his own breath, and when he let it go, the most wonderful thing happened. Emir felt his spirit rush into the heavens, and for a moment he felt as if he were the sky and the stars, and all of the creatures of the earth at once. This feeling only lasted for the briefest time, but to Emir it seemed to last for a century. He knew he'd had a message from one in many, the God of all life. The next thing he knew, he was sitting on the garden bench, and everything was normal again. Inspiration stood up, though, and said, "Well, I have to be going." Emir could hardly manage to speak. He was still so excited. But he said in alarm, "Go? I'd be so alone without you that I wouldn't know what to do." "Ninny," she said, but gently. "You have lots of things to write down in your mental notebook, for one thing. You won't have time to miss me. Anyway, I'll be with you, really. You just won't see me as you do now. If you want me, just call, and then listen the way that you did a little while ago." "No," Emir said, "I don't want you to disappear. I feel lonely just thinking about it." "There's a lot of work for you to do yet," Inspiration said. "The kingdom will still have its problems, but now you'll be able to help even more, because you've learned to let nature work for you instead of demanding that it do this or that. Besides, now you'll be even more self-reliant. And we'll all help too, Emir." 1,000 voices at once seemed to speak these words. Emir blinked, and for just an instant he saw the parade of life again, with himself leading it as he had done before. He saw Napoleon and Michelangelo and New York and Paris and the immense boulevard. All the people in the parade called, "Thank you, Emir," and the flags blew in the wind. The end. Thank you, Jane Roberts. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.